Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Inside the Marble Palace, Post Media Saskatchewan's look at the goings on at the Saskatchewan Legislature. I'm Murray Mandrick, political columnist with the Leader Post and Star Phoenix. Joining me, as always, Jeremy Symes, our political reporter, and a familiar face. Happy birthday this week, Adam. Adam Hunter, provincial affairs reporter for CBC. Are we the same age now?
I'm trying to catch up, but no, sadly
Trying to
not.
catch up. You will soon enough the way my life is going. Let's start with Jeremy, and let's start with a familiar topic in COVID-19 and where the government seems to stand, because there was considerable controversy from both Premier Scott Moe and Health Minister uh, Paul Merriman as to why we are not getting uh, at least daily death counts in terms of people dying from COVID 19, because February turned out to be the third worst month and we still don't have all the numbers in from February. Can you explain, I guess, starting with Minister Merriman's explanation as to why we're not getting these numbers?
Right, absolutely. So the opposition yesterday was really grilling Merriman on why we aren't getting these daily updates. And his explanation is, well, because Dr. Shahab recommended to us to turn these daily updates into weekly updates. Now, the NDP, they're not really buying that argument. They're saying, this is all smoke and mirrors. This was a ministry decision. But after the question period, reporters scrummed with Merriman and we kept asking, was this a decision by Shahab and why did he give this recommendation? And all of that. And he just kept saying, this was Shahab's recommendation, and that Shahab told him, or at least he was arguing that when we have weekly updates, we have a better picture of the COVID situation in Saskatchewan. There's more context to what we're seeing. He was saying when we do daily updates, you might see 0 deaths one day, you might see a bunch of deaths the next day, and people just get this confusing message. At least that's the impression I got from him. And so he's saying it's more clear when we do daily updates. And this, he was really firm in saying that this did come from Dr. Shahab. Now, Dr. Shahab obviously provides recommendations to the government on everything COVID, and Merriman sits down with him probably once a week, maybe more, we're not sure, on what the government should be doing. The government takes those recommendations and they make decisions based off of them. And yeah, so that's kind of the state where we are now. Just this idea that Shahab made this recommendation, the province took it and moved forward with it.
Adam, you've followed this story for a while, and you've probably been at most press conferences with Dr. Shahab um, in the last 2 years. I don't recall Dr. Shahab ever taking a position as to what information the government should or shouldn't release is in his role as head of public health policy for the province. And I don't understand why anyone would think that Dr. Shahab has a dog in this fight as to whether we release numbers daily or not. Can you sort of explain the situation? Because the way I think I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be, don't think I am, but my understanding of what Dr. Shahab is saying is that for his work, yeah, I can pretty much make weekly assessments and follow trend lines based on the week, but I don't know if that's necessarily the same thing as saying Dr. Shahab is telling us not to release the numbers daily.
Yeah, I think the last time we heard from Dr. Shahab, or one of the last times we heard from Dr. Shahab in a provincial arranged news conference, he was talking about how we are shifting from treating COVID like other diseases, and we're going to go to a longer reporting period, and that would be weekly reporting. And as Jeremy said, that will give him more context, that he looks at week to week numbers. We can't ask Dr. Shahab about whether he recommended this or not to the government, what his recommendations were, and what the government took. And the government hasn't released any of these recommendations throughout the pandemic. And that's been something that the opposition has continually harped on and asked for, that they've said, we need to see what Dr. Shahab recommended to you and when, and what you actually put in practice. Minister Merriman, says that he doesn't get the numbers until Thursday, which I think many people might find hard to believe, that he doesn't get daily updates, or twice weekly updates. He gets it probably a few hours before the public gets it on Thursday afternoon. The thing that's interesting to me in the political context of this is that we are now in a sitting that started this week, and we'll have week-old numbers that the government and the opposition will debate for 3 days, 4 days actually, because on Thursday we have morning QP. In the afternoon is when the numbers come out, and so where the few days will go by, and we'll start with the next week's debate. Now, anyone that's been following this will know that we only get updated hospitalizations and ICU numbers. We don't get everything up to that Thursday, including deaths. So you mentioned earlier that we don't know the number of deaths that have happened in February because those numbers haven't come out yet fully until Thursday, and they'll be put together with early March. And so this isn't just the opposition asking for these daily updates. A lot of people in the public want to know. The government keeps saying, we need to do our own personal risk assessment, whether you're wearing a mask, whether you're going out in public, what your activities are. And the argument is, well, let us see what's happening in hospitals. Let's see what's happening in ICU. We are going to be behind when we find out if there is a bump, if there's an arrival of a new variant or something. It's going to take a couple of weeks for Saskatchewan people to be able to absorb that knowledge because of that weekly reporting. And we have to take Merriman at his word, I guess, that the recommendation came from Dr. Shahab. But like I said, we don't see those recommendations. We don't know what he's telling the province. And Dr. Shahab has said he's not going to release them either. So we're in this position where the opposition says that it's a ministry decision, that this is the government, as Jeremy said, deciding when they want the numbers out. And the last thing I'll say is Merriman was suggesting that other provinces are moving to weekly reporting. I haven't seen that yet. He could be right, and I'm sure that once Saskatchewan's done it, there are other provinces that'll make that move. But we know also that the COVID situation in Saskatchewan isn't ideal right now. We've had higher death numbers than other provinces in the last few weeks. We do have still very high hospitalizations, high ICU rates, and people want to know what's happening, because if you have a lot of people in hospital with COVID-related illness, that's going to affect your healthcare potentially, and that's going to affect what we talked about in the fall, surgeries and delays. And we don't know right now what's happening, day to day, and I don't think that's going to change. And that's, I guess, the position of the government, that we don't need to know. And the health minister also doesn't seem bothered that he only finds out once a week.
Seems no small coincidence that the dashboard had become a bit of a daily embarrassment for the Sask Party government, because it did point to things that might contradict the credibility of the government's policy decisions. And that's simply the reality in politics, is the government doesn't like things that question government decisions, which is why they're not really all that favorable about having long sessions and or lots of question periods where the opposition gets to do precisely that and ask serious questions about government policy. And it's hard not to see this as an extension of this. But the reality in democracy is this is how it works. You need oppositions asking questions. You need governments providing answers. We got a taste of that, Jeremy, in the initial days of the session. Just a quick rundown of what it was that the opposition has raised in the first few days of the session. And I guess maybe from your perspective, what struck you as interesting in terms of issues that were particularly tough for government to answer in the initial days?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll touch just on the first day of the session. It seemed a bit more, I don't want to say unifying, but we were getting more of those question and answers instead of talking points versus talking points. We saw all the MLAs had Ukraine flags on their desks. Opposition was talking about Ukraine. The province was giving answers to that. The opposition was saying, hey, would you commit more money? And Premier Scott Moe said, not at this time, but we are considering every avenue to bring more Ukrainians into the province, and we'll spend pretty much whatever it takes. There is no really budgeted number there. So we were seeing some answers there. On the gas price issue right now, gas prices are super high. They were like $1.70 yesterday morning when I left my house. And the opposition was asking the government, are you going to put in a relief program? We're seeing Alberta right now put in a program that is supposed to save people about 13 cents a liter. Why don't you do this for people in Saskatchewan who have to pay these high prices right now? And we're seeing these high prices because of the war in Ukraine, but also because the economy is revving. We don't have much oil and gas supply. And it's a low supply, high demand situation on top of the war. So Premier Scott Moe response was to that, nothing's off the table. We're going to be looking at all of our options. He wouldn't commit to a relief program immediately. We'll see if things change in the future as, prices continue to rise. I don't know if there's a stop there anytime soon. So we'll definitely be watching for that. And the premier was also mentioning the budget. That kind of stood out to me as well, just saying they're looking at having to pay down the debt and other things, but they also want to invest more in surgeries and health and stuff like that. So those were some little tidbits that came out, but I guess in the beginning it did seem a little bit more traditional question answer instead of, just talking points over talking points. That was my impression.
I'm fascinated that, uh, Adam, because you and I have been around for a little while, and I think Jeremy makes a great point. It was a different start to the session, at least compared to maybe what you and I have basically seen in recent years of late, where the animos, the anger, the frustration, the political rhetoric has seemed to increase the longer this government has gone into its now almost 15-year tenure. Were you struck by that too, in terms of that first couple of days, and maybe how quickly it kind of returned to more of what you and I are kind of used to seeing at the legislature, Adam?
Yeah, I think on the gas price thing, the context there is important. You look at Alberta, and Jason Kenney's facing a leadership review. He's facing an election sooner than Scott Moe, and Alberta has a higher reliance in their revenue stream on oil and gas and prices there. And so that makes it a little bit different than Saskatchewan. And the other reason, Saskatchewan's so close to their budget, Alberta's already released their budget, and I would assume that the budget is pretty much in ink and on its way off to the printers if it isn't already there. So there's not much maybe that they can do at this point to give people relief. I think the debate over the carbon tax relief and that coming up on April 1st as it will rise versus giving people a relief on the provincial taxes on fuel is a really interesting debate. The Ukrainian issue seemed to be one that Ryan Miley as the leader, who's still the leader. Yes, he's still the leader. Has been pushing for a couple of weeks in the party that they want to be part of the conversations. They want to maybe own some of that space with the government of welcoming refugees, helping with supports, as Jeremy mentioned, helping with maybe some money. The government doesn't seem super open to that partnership, but they did seem, more willing to kind of discuss those points. On the refugee issue, I think that's another really interesting one. We'll remember a couple of years ago, about 6-7 years ago now, there was a bit of a controversy over Syrian refugees coming to Saskatchewan, and Brad Wald actually asked Prime Minister Trudeau to put a pause or even slow down, I guess, the influx of Syrian refugees, saying they're to be screened. We're not hearing that about Ukrainian refugees right now. It's a much different message. It's basically the floodgates are open. We take as many as we can. We'll settle them as soon as we can. That's the message from Minister Harrison. He thinks Saskatchewan's best placed to bring in the unlimited number of refugees and also freeing up spaces in the immigrant nominee program to Ukrainians. So I think that's another interesting aspect. And to whether the debate was a bit more cordial, it lasted maybe 4 questions because eventually Bronwyn Eyre, the Minister of Energy, referred to Alina Young as Goldilocks and the squad over there, and had a whole prepared statement that she was then asked to apologize for by the Speaker as the opposition raised a point of order. So we were cordial for about I don't know, 15 minutes. And the other thing that stands out to me, Murray and Jeremy, you guys both tweeted this the first day, is we have just a very stark visual in the House right now. In the last couple of years, there's been distancing as much as possible. We've had government members on the NDP opposition side sharing that space, maybe sometimes one person to an area or 2 people. Now we have all 49, my math is bad, MLAs on the government side packed in there. And it just is, it's very stark when you're in the building seeing the NDP, their small caucus on the other side. The other thing I'm really fascinated by, and Maria, I'd like your opinion on this too, is how Carla Beck's leadership is going to find its way through this. She's the only person that's put their name in the hat from the caucus. Others have stepped to the side and put their support behind her. And I wonder how the opposition is going to handle that when they give her questions. I know there's an effort to get her in front of the media too after question period, but we don't typically, do that for a leadership candidate. And
or just for the
I remember the
purpose of
SAS
doing it?
party, they kind of had to step back a little bit when they had all of their MLAs. A lot of them had to leave, they all had to leave cabinet when they ran a couple of years ago. So I'm a little interested to see how that's going to play out.
Well, it's interesting. If you're asking my opinion, I don't think the government was particularly intimidated when Carla Beck stood on her feet for, I guess, maybe the first time yesterday. Yeah, yesterday, I believe, and asked a series of questions. There was a lot of cat calls related to
Yeah.
her leadership and a few other things. How is that going, Jeremy, in terms of how the opposition is handling that at this particular point? Because it is problematic for them in terms of balancing off questions when you have one person that actually is running for a leader and can use the vehicle of the House in question period to promote their cause. How has the opposition basically structured their question period that you've seen so far to address that?
Yeah, that's a tricky question in a way to see how they are balancing that. But we're seeing, I guess, a lot of the critic roles come up and ask questions. We're seeing, I don't know if Ryan Miley's taking a step back in a way. He has asked some, but I remember yesterday, uh, it was a lot of the other critics asking questions, and Jeremy Harrison was kind of shouting across the aisle, being like, "If you have something to say, ask a question. You have something to say, ask a question." You know what I mean? Like heckling him to kind of step up and be that leader, even though he is stepping down. Like you mentioned, we saw Carla Beck stand up, ask a question. It didn't really seem like the government side was, like you said, intimidated or anything like that. I know Donna Harpower was saying, kept berating her and heckling, do you support the carbon tax? Will you admit that you're against it? And they're really trying to drill her down on that. So it'll be interesting to see how they structure this and who's going to be asking the questions. Carla Beck's in this municipal affairs critic role, which I don't know if that's super high profile. I guess they have to kind of balance that out and put her in a more less high profile role as she does a lot of leadership campaigning in a way, but they also want to get her up there too, I suppose, so she can make her points. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm curious and I'm fascinated to
Yeah,
see
it'll be
how it goes.
interesting to see how that plays out. I think basically how the government starts handling their own problems, and they seem to either be creating new problems for themselves, as we saw last session, related to moving the bill to dispense with some responsibilities of the sergeant of arms to elsewhere, and they say that's proceeding, and whole new other problem. They're getting sued. They're getting sued by Brandt Industries, Adam, who everybody thought was working in conjunction or in with the support of government to build that CNIB Brandt office complex on the edge of Regina Park, Wascana Parkway, just I guess south of where you normally do your business at CBC. This is a big problem for the government because you don't want to be fighting with your friends. You want to be fighting with the opposition. How do you think that's going to play out this session, Adam?
Well, Brandt Industries has been a big supporter of the Saskatchewan Party, big donor through the years, and great job by your colleague Brandon Harder at the Leader Post with getting the story and talking to the Semples at Brandt, and they don't sound too pleased with the government and how this has all gone. Obviously, they're in court. It was interesting to hear from Don McMorris, the minister for who's been around, and he would know the relationship very well. He's minister responsible for the Provincial Capital Commission, who's named in the suit. He couldn't say much about the lawsuit, but he did say, it's never good when the government's getting sued, and that they were hopeful that this would go forward. That there's, they're on step 23. I know we heard that a few times, Jeremy, yesterday of 38. But the point I think he was making is that the process was still ongoing, and maybe the pandemic had slowed things down. But I didn't find the CNIB brand project to be the front of mind for a lot of people because of the things that have happened over the last couple of years, the where it was when it first started, and that the controversy surrounding it. And Councillor Hawkins of the Regina City Council is not one of the he's named a little bit in the lawsuit as being someone who got in the way in Brandt's mind, but it's going to be interesting again to see how this plays out and how this affects really the relationship. Just a couple of days ago, Pierre Poilievre, one of his campaign announcements was at Brandt in Regina, flanked by Andrew Scheer and Cory Tucker and Michael Cram, some Conservative MPs, shaking hands with a lot of the people there, and stepping on machinery, taking photos. So I think that to me is just fascinating to watch how that relationship unfolds. I think the criticism the government got initially was that they were cozy with Brandt and that they were giving Brandt a deal on this building, and that it was going to be more of an office building than a CNIB headquarters. And there was a lot of reporting done on that at the time. And it's been kind of on the back burner. So to hear this come out now is a little bit surprising. But it sounded to me like Minister McMorris doesn't think this is going forward based on the lawsuit and based on your reporting in your newspaper. That then hearing from the samples, that sounds like that is the case.
Yeah, obviously the government is quite happy that the NDP is in a bit of disarray, and they truly are, as parties always are during a leadership contest, because there's always the uncertainties. But they have their own problems that they're going to have to figure out, and this being one of them, and the other ones we talked about, and I guess that we'll continue to talk about, because I guess we've run out of time for today. I thank you, Jeremy. I thank you, Adam, for your insights. This was a great conversation as always, and please come and join us again on Inside the Marble Palace next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bernie. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.